The story will be told from the perspective of the main female character.
Grab your luggage and move out. My younger sister, Sarah, stood right in front of me, arms crossed. She gave me a harsh stare. This house belongs to our new family now. There is no room for you here. Behind her stood Mark, her husband, along with his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Denton. My own mother and father stood there too. They were supposed to be the actual owners of this property, but they looked like my sister's bodyguards. Every person in that room looked at me the same way. It was a cold, dismissing glare mixing blame and relief. They seemed happy to finally be rid of me, Elizabeth Caldwell, like a heavy burden lifted. It had only been 6 months since my sister and Mark moved into this family house in Denver, Colorado. They wanted to save money after their wedding. A month later, Mark's parents appeared. They claimed they had sold their own place. Before anyone could truly object, they settled down in the separate apartment located behind the main house. That was the unit my late grandmother used to occupy. Since then, the home where I grew up became totally unfamiliar. My brother-in-law occupied the main living room sofa permanently. He kept the TV volume incredibly loud. Whenever I entered the kitchen, my sister would make an annoyed noise. "Oh, I was just about to prepare a shake for Mark," she would say. She made it sound like I was interrupting her. If I waited my turn for the bathroom, my brother-in-law's mother would smile faintly and ask, "Are you rushing off to something important, Liz?" My parents never once took my side. They had completely supported this new family. They had always favored my sister, the dramatic and selfish one. They just expected me, the older daughter, to be the patient one. They never corrected her behavior, no matter what I had to endure. Now my father played golf with Mark's father. My mother went shopping with my sister and Mark's mother, excluding me completely. The eldest daughter they once had seemed to have simply vanished to them. So when my sister delivered this final order today, my heart felt strangely quiet. I thought, finally, the moment has come. I slowly looked around the living room, meeting the gaze of each person. Not one of them offered support. They all wanted me erased from the house. I let that reality sink in deeply. "Fine," I told them. "I will start packing." My calm answer obviously surprised them. My sister's eyes grew wide for a brief moment before a self-satisfied smile appeared on her face. "Good, that's a smart choice, Liz. Let's make the move out official by the end of next weekend." "Agreed." My parents simply looked down without speaking. They had no idea what was coming. None of them did. They didn't know the truth about this house. They also didn't know what I had been quietly preparing for years. This was not just moving out. This was the start of a long-delayed reckoning. The next day I started boxing up my things silently. My sister and Mark suddenly walked into my room, laughing. They carried a tape measure. They began measuring the walls without even acknowledging my presence. "This wall is perfect for the king-size bed, right, Mark?" my sister asked. "Definitely, and that spot over there will be your dressing table, honey." They happily discussed their future plans, acting as if I had already ceased to exist. I kept folding, sorting, and packing, not saying a word. Then came the Friday evening, the night before the deadline my sister had set for me to move. I sat in my room and heard loud bursts of laughter and cheerful music coming from downstairs. I crept to the top of the staircase and peered down. They were having a party, clearly celebrating my eviction. My sister raised her glass of champagne high. A toast to the start of our new family, and to my wise older sister for clearing the way for our future. Everyone roared with laughter at her words. In that whole scene there was no sign of me, the person who had given years of my life to this house. I turned away quietly and went back to my room. I took out my phone and typed a brief message to one contact. "Everything is prepared. Please proceed tomorrow at 10 a.m., exactly as planned." The reply came back instantly. "Tomorrow marks the beginning of your new life, Liz." The next morning, Saturday, I walked into the living room. Everyone was relaxing on the couch, sipping their coffee. When they noticed me, their casual chatter stopped, replaced by guarded stares. "Good morning, Liz. Are you completely packed?" my sister asked, using an exaggeratedly sweet tone. "Almost," I replied. "But before I leave, there is something I need to share with everyone." At that, I saw a flash of anxiety cross their faces. "Talk about what now? Of all times," Mark's mother snapped first defensively. If you are here to request money, forget it. We are finished taking care of you. It's not about finances, I said. It's about the future of this house. My sister immediately jumped to her feet, clearly annoyed. The future? We are the future of this house, our new family. You have nothing to do with it anymore. Do you even realize what day it is? Her outburst left my mother and father flustered. They glanced helplessly back and forth between us. Is that truly how you want to handle this? I asked, offering a slight smile. My voice was disturbingly steady. Then my brother-in-law, Mark, spoke up, sounding like he was spitting out the words. Liz, this is embarrassing. Just leave already, will you? I did not flinch, not even for a second. In fact, the more emotional they became, the calmer and colder my own heart felt. Ding dong. The sharp, authoritative sound of the doorbell echoed through the living room. Everyone turned toward the front door, confused. Who could that be? Someone murmured. Maybe a delivery. As they speculated, I walked to the door, composed and deliberate. When I opened it, a middle-aged man stood there, flawlessly dressed in a tailored suit. It was the man I had messaged the night before, my attorney, Mr. Sterling. He gave me a polite nod. Then he cast a cool, appraising look into the living room. Good morning, Miss Caldwell. I arrived precisely as we scheduled. I invited him inside. My sister and the others stared, their faces tight with confusion. Who is this man? My sister muttered. Mr. Sterling stepped in front of the sofa. He placed his leather briefcase on the table and clicked open the clasps. He then turned to everyone present and introduced himself in a calm, yet undeniably official voice that permitted no argument. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sterling. I am here representing Miss Elizabeth Caldwell as her attorney. I am here today as her legal representative to finalize all matters concerning the ownership of this property. The words attorney and property ownership instantly froze the atmosphere. My mother and father exchanged startled looks. Mark's parents frowned. My sister looked back and forth between Mr. Sterling and me, clearly unable to understand what was happening. Ownership, what does that mean? This house belongs to Mom and Dad, my sister said, her voice trembling. Mr. Sterling shook his head gently. No, miss, that statement was only accurate until 3 months ago. He pulled a thick bundle of papers from his briefcase and carefully laid one sheet on the table. 3 months ago, this property went into foreclosure because of unpaid mortgage debts. It was legally seized by the bank and put up for public auction. He paused, meeting my eyes. I gave a small nod, the silent signal we had agreed upon. It was time to reveal the truth. The attorney's next words exploded like a quiet bomb in the living room. Foreclosure and auction. My parents instantly went pale. Their eyes darted nervously. They knew this already. Of course they knew. They had received several final warnings from the bank months ago, warnings that the house was about to be repossessed. But they had not told anyone, not even my sister and Mark. Perhaps they hoped to save face, or maybe they simply believed the problem would somehow vanish. Either way, they had hidden the truth of their own financial collapse and deceived all of us. Mom, Dad, is that true? My sister shrieked, her voice cracking. My father finally spoke, his tone low and defeated. Yes, it's true, but I thought we could work something out. I was negotiating with the bank. Work something out, my sister cried in disbelief. So what? This house belongs to someone else now. Where are we supposed to live? Her panic-stricken expression would have been almost comical if it were not so pathetic. Just minutes ago, these people were conspiring to drive me out and claim this house for themselves. Now they were shaking at the idea of losing their own home. Mark and his parents finally seemed to understand the seriousness of the situation. Their faces turned deathly pale as they glared accusingly at my parents, as if this failure was somehow my parents' fault. Mr. Sterling, however, remained perfectly composed, unaffected by the rising chaos. His voice was professional and calm as he continued. Yes, that is correct. The auction process was conducted through proper legal channels. It was entirely transparent and fair. The property was sold at its legitimate market value to its new owner. And who is this new owner? Mark's father asked, his voice dry and breaking. All eyes were fixed on Mr. Sterling. The silence was so heavy that you could hear everyone holding their breath. Mr. Sterling spoke slowly and clearly, making sure there was no doubt in his answer. The new owner of this property is. He paused briefly, then stepped back slightly next to me, extending his hand respectfully. She is right here, Miss Elizabeth Caldwell. Time seemed to stop inside the living room. My sister froze, her mouth wide open. Mark collapsed onto the sofa, repeating, "No, no way." Mark's parents let out a dry, disbelieving laugh, as if this whole scene were a ridiculous joke. The expressions on my mother and father were the most complex. There was a mix of shock, confusion, and a hint of relief. They had narrowly avoided losing everything entirely. However, they now faced the incomprehensible fact that the new rightful owner of their home was the very daughter they had recently tried to discard. The silence broke when my sister suddenly burst into hysterical laughter. She pointed a trembling finger right at me and shrieked, "That's a complete lie. It has to be. Liz owning this place. Don't make me laugh. She's nothing but a boring office assistant at some real estate office. There is no possible way she could afford this property on that miserable salary." Her words were filled with the same contempt and dismissal they had always shown me. She was relying on the image they had built of the timid, dull, insignificant older sister. I looked at her calmly, then genuinely smiled for the first time in years. "Oh, Sarah, did you honestly believe I was just an office assistant? It's true I work at a real estate firm, but only to monitor market trends firsthand. My real profession has been elsewhere. I have been quietly building assets for years while you were too busy showing off your perfect life." I explained that while she and her friends spent time brunching, shopping, and posting their carefully curated happiness online, I lived cheaply. I saved every available penny for my future. I used nearly all my salary for a down payment on a small studio apartment outside of the city. That modest first investment became the source that grew, property by property, into something much bigger. As I spoke, Mr. Sterling methodically pulled more documents from his briefcase, spreading them across the table. These documents summarize Miss Caldwell's current real estate portfolio. The list showed 3 high-end apartment units in the city, plus several rental homes in nearby suburbs. Each property included its address and current market appraisal. A stunned silence fell again. None of them had imagined I possessed this much wealth. And here are asset verification statements, along with confirmation of Miss Caldwell's VIP status from several financial institutions. Mr. Sterling continued. Within the real estate investment community, she is recognized as a capable and rapidly rising investor. My father picked up one paper, studying the financial figures repeatedly, his hands shaking. My mother covered her mouth, utterly speechless. Finally, Mr. Sterling placed the final document on top, an official property deed. At the bottom, printed clearly and unmistakably, was my name, Elizabeth Caldwell, registered owner. This cannot be happening," my sister stammered, staring at the paper. She sank helplessly to the floor, her entire world collapsing around her. On the floor, she began to wail like a small child. "It isn't fair, it's not fair. I am the one who got married. I am the one who built this family. I take care of Mom and Dad and Mark's parents too. I have done so much more for this house than you ever have, so why should you own it?" Her words, heavy with self-pity and entitlement, barely reached me. I felt nothing. I simply stated coldly, "Contribute. Do you mean spending our parents' retirement savings? Or pushing this house into foreclosure with your irresponsibility? Or inviting your husband's parents to move in and treat this home like your personal kingdom? Ownership does not work that way, Sarah. It is not measured by feelings." My sister opened her mouth, but no words came out. Then Mark, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. His voice was tentative and oily. "Wait, Liz, come on, we are family, right? There's no need to make this all about legal documents and ownership. We can discuss this, can't we?" His sudden humility was repulsive. The same man who had mocked me hours before was now practically begging at my feet. I looked at him, then scanned the room at every face, the same faces that had watched me pack my bags without saying a word. "Yes, you are correct about one thing, Mark," I said. "This is a family issue. That is exactly why we need to clarify right here and now who truly belongs in this home." I then turned to Mr. Sterling and gave him a small nod. He nodded back and pulled the last stack of papers from his briefcase. It was a rental agreement. "Well then, everyone," Mr. Sterling announced. "These are the conditions from your new landlord, Miss Elizabeth Caldwell, regarding the future occupancy of this house." Mr. Sterling began placing copies of the lease in front of each person. "There are two possibilities," he stated, tapping the contract gently with his index finger. "The first option is to sign this lease and continue residing here with Miss Caldwell as your landlord." When they heard the word landlord, Mark's parents grimaced. My sister glanced between the documents and me, disbelief covering her face. Mr. Sterling ignored their reactions and continued calmly. "Naturally, rent will be required. The amount listed here is calculated based on the fair market value for this specific neighborhood. It is entirely reasonable. Utilities will be your own responsibility. Any major changes or remodeling without approval from Miss Caldwell are strictly forbidden. Otherwise, you will adhere to standard rental agreement terms." Mark's father looked down at the document and shouted, "What?" It was probably the rent price, which was far higher than he had expected. This was the moment they realized how comfortable and privileged their lives had been, living there all this time without paying a single cent. "And the second option," Mr. Sterling paused, pointing toward the calendar on the wall, "is not to live here. In that case, exactly 2 weeks from today will be your move-out date. You must gather all your belongings and vacate the property by then. Understandably, no relocation or housing costs will be covered." I spoke up, emphasizing his statement. "So what will it be? Sign the lease and stay, or pack up and leave in 2 weeks? The choice is entirely yours." It was a cold, simple, yet perfectly fair ultimatum. I folded my arms and silently studied their expressions. They were now facing the exact same reality they had tried to impose on me. The living room fell into a silence so heavy that time seemed suspended. Everyone stared in shock at the contracts and at Mr. Sterling's calm, unyielding face. The first to react was Mark's mother. She shrieked, "This is an outrage. Do you even know who we are? Our son is your brother-in-law, and you expect us to pay rent. How dare you?" "That's right," Mark's father joined in with some incoherent argument. "You could only buy this house because we supported your sister and Mark. We held this family together. You should be grateful, not kicking us out." Their desperate protests only made me look at them more coolly. They still did not grasp the situation. They were no longer even guests in this house. They were illegal occupants clinging to what was not theirs. My parents looked completely shaken. "Liz, please stop this. We are family," my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. But those words held no meaning. They had agreed to force me out. Now that the same consequence faced them, they suddenly remembered the word family. The hypocrisy was shocking. My sister and Mark exchanged worried whispers, likely trying to find a loophole, but there was no escape for any of them. I spoke calmly but firmly. "I am afraid you do not have unlimited time. If you do not decide today, I can begin proceedings for a court-ordered eviction. If that happens, you will have a permanent legal record as unlawful occupants." That statement was the final warning. Legal action and the resulting court record were threats powerful enough to crush their emotional resistance. Mark's parents, who had been shouting moments before, went silent. At last, they seemed to understand that their anger and pride meant nothing when faced with the law. In the thick, suffocating quiet, the first person to pick up a pen was unexpectedly my father. He scanned the papers with shaking hands, let out a long sigh of resignation, and signed his name. My mother signed next, her shoulders slumped. They knew they had no actual choice if they wanted to keep a roof over their heads. "No, I will not do it, never," my sister cried, shaking her head angrily. "Then what, do you want us living on the street with our parents? We have 0 savings, Sarah." "None," Mark said forcefully, twisting his face in frustration. In the end, he roughly signed the contract, tears streaming down his face. The last holdouts were Mark's parents. Mark's father, his pride clearly wounded, sat glaring at the contract, his face crimson. Beside him, Mark's mother whispered anxiously, "Darling, if you don't sign, they really will make us leave. We already sold the other house. We have nowhere else to go." At that, Mark's father slumped forward, as if all strength had drained away. With a heavy sigh, he took the pen and signed. And so, the 6 people who had tried to throw me out of my home just hours earlier, acting as if they controlled it, all became my tenants. Mr. Sterling collected the signed lease copies, checked them carefully, and gave a satisfied nod. The agreement is now officially effective. As of today, you will all live in this house under the rules of your new landlord, Miss Elizabeth Caldwell. The first rent payment is due on the 1st of next month. Please ensure there are no delays. I pointed to the stack of contracts they had just signed and added firmly, "You are all tenants now. Mom and Dad, as well as my sister and Mark, will continue living in the main house. Mark's parents will remain in the guest house as they do currently. Each household will pay their own rent to me separately and responsibly." Understood. That separation was the first step toward breaking their toxic codependency. No one could hide behind anyone else anymore. Even after Mr. Sterling departed, the air in the living room remained leaden. The new tenants sat in silence, slumped on the sofa like empty shells, unable to absorb the reality they had just agreed to. I gave them a quick look and turned toward the staircase. There was no reason for me to stay here any longer. But then a quiet voice called out from behind me, "Liz." I turned to see my mother, her face tight with worry. "Are you going somewhere?" "Of course," I replied. "I will not be living here." At my sharp reply, everyone looked up in surprise. "Then why did you even buy this house?" my sister demanded, her voice sharp with accusation. I slowly scanned the living room. This was the precious place where I had been raised, full of countless memories. Yet it was also the place that had profoundly hurt my heart and tried to steal my dignity. I purchased this house because I wanted to protect it. That is all. Our family was never what you would call close, but I could not stand the thought of this place, my home, ending up owned by strangers. I added, "That does not mean I want to live here with you." I reached into my bag and placed a single key on the table. It was the key to the new apartment I had viewed just yesterday. "I am moving into a condo about 30 minutes away by car. I will manage this property remotely as your landlord. If anything happens, contact the management company, not me. Do not reach out to me directly." These words were meant to draw a clear final boundary between us. We were no longer simply family. We were a landlord and her tenants, nothing more. My father spoke hesitantly. "Liz, concerning the rent," he struggled for the words. "We simply cannot afford to pay that amount every month." I couldn't help but sigh in disbelief. Even at this point, they were still trying to plead for my sympathy. "That is not my problem," I said coldly. "The 6 of you can figure it out. Mark's parents, Dad, Mom, you are all still capable of working. And my sister, if you think you can keep playing the stay-at-home princess forever, you are seriously mistaken." At that, Mark's parents and my sister glared at me with clear resentment, but they had no words left to fight back. Without another glance, I went upstairs, retrieved my suitcase and left the house. Months passed. Life in my new apartment has been surprisingly peaceful. For the first time, I could spend my days exactly as I wished, in freedom, in silence, with no one to answer to. I focused on my work as a real estate investor, steadily growing my portfolio and living a content life. Despite all their earlier complaints about being broke, my family managed to pay their rent on time every month. Then, about 6 months after I moved out, an email came from my father. "Everyone in the family wants to speak with you. Could you please come back to the house just once?" Cautious but curious, I went to the house at the agreed time. It was my first time setting foot there in half a year. All 6 of them were waiting in the living room, dressed neatly, their faces tight with tension. "Liz, I am truly sorry," my father said. His voice trembled, but there was genuine sincerity in it. He explained that the months after I left had been absolute hell. The constant exhaustion from finding unfamiliar jobs had made the atmosphere in the house bitter and strained. But if they wanted to keep their home, everyone had to contribute. One night, my sister had murmured, "I never realized how difficult it was to earn just this little money." Seeing my sister break down in tears, my father found himself saying almost unconsciously, "Liz built hundreds of times more wealth than this completely on her own." In that moment, they finally understood the true value of what I had accomplished and how foolish and dependent they had been. From that night onward, the shouting and blaming disappeared. Slowly, they started trying to reconstruct themselves as a family. After my father finished speaking, my mother, my sister, and even Mark and his parents each offered their apologies to me. They were not asking for money, nor were they performing an act for sympathy. Their words carried real regret, a genuine acknowledgement of the harm they had inflicted. I was too stunned to speak, but as I looked at their faces I could see it. The hardship of the last 6 months had truly transformed them. I took a slow breath and said quietly, "I cannot simply erase the past. The wounds will never vanish completely, but I can see that you are trying to confront your mistakes and change." A faint smile touched my lips. "As your landlord, I can confirm you have become responsible tenants, and as a family, maybe it is time we start fresh." At those words, tears of relief welled up in my parents' eyes. It might not have been a perfect, happy ending, but it was undoubtedly a new beginning. That day, when I nearly lost everything, what I was actually safeguarding was not just a house. It was the final strong foundation, a place where a broken family could finally learn how to stand on its own again.